She spoke in French, assuming the sales associate wouldn't understand. She believed she was humiliating a simple woman, one who knew nothing of the world. But what that sales associate held within her was something no money could buy. When her lips parted and she responded, word for word, without a single misplaced comma, the air in the boutique stilled. That moment was just the beginning. Diane arrived at the boutique on an ordinary Monday, a worn backpack slung over her shoulder, a smile that asked no one for permission. The store was one of the most famous in the city, nestled within a prestigious Marina Bay Sands complex. Imported couture, potent perfumes, lighting that cast everything in a golden aspirational glow, a place where people entered as much to be seen as to acquire, and where employees quickly learned an unwritten rule. The more discreet your presence, the better. Diane absorbed this on her first day, though she interpreted the rule in her own way. While other associates focused on appearing elegant, she focused on understanding the flow of the store, which pieces lingered, which clients returned, and which returned dissatisfied. In her first week, without a word to anyone, she subtly rearranged the accessories section. Only those intimately familiar with the space would notice the shift. Yet, sales for that section climbed. Claudia, the manager, couldn't explain why, and wisely, didn't ask. Diane didn't possess the kind of striking beauty that would halt conversation in the boutique. She was a woman of 42, hair pulled back, nails short, not a single piece of jewelry on her person. Beside the other sales associates, perfectly made up, fragrant, trained to entice with their appearance, she seemed almost out of place. Her colleagues noticed, and some were quick to make it clear. "Which branch did you come from before this?" Rodrigo, the most senior associate, probed during their third-day break. "Outside," she simply replied, her gaze distant. "Outside? Like, overseas?" he pressed, reaching for his coffee. Rodrigo let out an awkward chuckle, mistaking it for a joke. Diane didn't bother to elaborate. What no one knew, and what she was in no hurry to divulge, was that her worn backpack had traversed airports across 3 continents, that those unadorned hands had signed reports read by executives in Paris, that her carefully neutral accent concealed years lived far beyond Singapore's shores. She was in that boutique for a reason, but the time to reveal it hadn't yet arrived. One afternoon in her second week, as she meticulously folded a stack of imported silk scarves, she paused. Her eyes drifted to the main display window, silent for a few seconds, as if calculating. Then, she withdrew a small, black-covered notebook from her pocket and jotted something down. "What is it?" Fernanda whispered to her colleague beside her. "Nothing," Diane replied. "Just an observation." Fernanda glanced at the display, saw nothing amiss, shrugged, and returned to her task. The note read, "Main display window misdirected for foot traffic. Premium product invisible to entering clients. Estimated visibility loss, 40%. No one read it. No one asked." The notebook vanished back into her pocket. This was Diane's modus operandi. Observe before speaking, accumulate before acting. She had learned the hard way that displaying competence too soon, in the wrong place, to the wrong people, could prove prohibitively expensive. So she waited. And while she waited, she attended to clients with a level of attention most sales associates no longer possessed. She heard what they said, and more importantly, what they didn't. She sensed when a woman entered seeking validation, not just clothing. She perceived when a mother was shopping for her daughter and needed kindness, not aggressive sales pitches. The clients she served returned. Claudia, the manager, noticed this, but rather than praise, her brow furrowed. There was something about this new employee she couldn't quite categorize. Not a bad employee, certainly, but she didn't fit the boutique's mold. And managers like Claudia, in boutiques like this, preferred pattern over talent. On a Thursday afternoon, the boutique door opened with that specific, effortless grace of someone accustomed to doors opening for them. Diane's eyes lifted, and something in her face shifted for a bare second, imperceptible to anyone not paying rapt attention. The woman entered with a firm stride, but her gaze swept across the racks without truly settling. It wasn't the look of someone searching for an item. It was the look of someone searching for a person. An alliance ring spun twice, then thrice, on her finger, unnoticed by her. The security guard at the entrance received a look so brief, so utterly devoid of acknowledgement, it seemed to erase him from the space. And the designer handbag she carried, the kind that cost enough for a used car, was closed with a slightly crooked clasp, a small detail that escaped notice when someone left home with their mind elsewhere. She hadn't come to buy anything. Diane knew exactly who that woman was, And she knew, with the chilling clarity of someone who had seen this situation play out before, that the afternoon was about to become significantly more complicated. Vera Tan didn't enter anywhere. She arrived. There was a subtle distinction, and anyone who had worked with people of her calibre knew how to recognize it. It wasn't just the clothes that cost more than any employee's monthly salary. It wasn't the perfume that preceded her arrival. It was the posture, the unshakable certainty that the surrounding space belonged to her by natural right. 48 years old, dark hair, impeccably styled, and a smile that functioned as a warning. When Vera smiled, it was time to brace yourself. She was the wife of Eduardo Tan, owner of a conglomerate with investments across Southeast Asia, but those who truly knew her understood that the title wife was far too small for what she actually was. Vera co-managed the family's image, selected who her husband appeared with in public, decided which events merited their presence and which did not. She had dismantled partnerships, terminated contracts, and sidelined employees, all with elegance, all with a smile, never raising her voice. It was simply more effective that way. She strolled through the boutique as if conducting an inspection, touching a few pieces with no real interest, her gaze sweeping over the sales associates with that specific look, the one that assesses and dismisses in less than 3 seconds. When her eyes landed on Diane, they lingered a second longer than expected. Claudia, the manager, materialized almost instantly, as if summoned by an invisible signal. Miss Sustan, what a pleasure. Her tone was reverential, reserved for truly important people. May I assist you personally today? No need, Claudia. Vera didn't even look at her focus still on Diane. Let her attend to me. Diane approached calmly, without haste, without the forced smile most sales associates plastered on their faces for moneyed clients. Good afternoon, she said. May I help you? Vera didn't respond immediately. She picked a scarf from a display, examined it, then carelessly returned it. This type of piece, she stated slowly, requires a trained eye to recommend. Do you have experience with high-end fashion? It was a question that didn't expect a real answer. It was the beginning of a game. Diane knew the game. I do, she replied, without elaboration. Vera raised an eyebrow. She was accustomed to longer, more nervous responses. The test slowly escalated, as it always did. First, indirect comments about the pieces. Comparisons to European brands she knew most associates wouldn't recognize. Diane knew them all, responding with precision, without arrogance, without trying to impress. This irritated Vera more than any error would have. So she shifted strategy, beginning to speak in French. It wasn't sudden, but a calculated transition. First a word here, another there, as if it were natural. Then full sentences, directed at Diane, loud enough for the other associates to hear. The tone was of someone laughing at a private joke. She remarked that the sales associate had the look of someone who had never left the city. She insinuated that certain people were born to serve and would never truly understand the world of those who were served. She lamented that true talent was so rare in this line of work. Mid-sentence, she subtly turned her head toward Claudia, a quick, almost imperceptible glance that said, "See?" Claudia immediately averted her eyes. Vera returned her gaze to Diane with a small smile playing on her lips, the kind that didn't need teeth to wound. Rodrigo, across the boutique, pretended not to hear. Fernanda stared at the floor. Claudia offered a weak, uncommitted smile, offering no intervention. Diane remained still, allowed Vera to finish, and then responded. In French, refined, precise, without hesitation. She not only understood every word, but, with the most disarming naturalness, corrected a slightly misused expression Vera had employed. She explained the more appropriate term and added, with the same calm as one discussing the weather, "But I understand that sometimes informality has its charm." The air in the boutique stopped. Rodrigo looked up. Fernanda slowly exhaled. Claudia's mouth hung slightly ajar. Vera did not retreat. She wasn't the type to retreat, but something flickered across her face, quick, almost imperceptible. It wasn't shame, it was recognition. She had encountered someone who didn't fit where she was. And for Vera, that wasn't admirable. It was a threat. She smiled her usual smile. Polite, controlled, empty. Interesting, she said in English. Very interesting. She left the boutique a few minutes later, buying nothing, and when she reached her car, she pulled out her phone. She had a number to call, and a decision made. The following morning, Claudia arrived at the boutique earlier than usual. Diane noticed. She also noticed the manager avoided eye contact. Responses were monosyllabic. Claudia had that particular attentiveness, of someone who had received an unpleasant instruction and hadn't yet decided how to execute it. The day was strangely quiet. Colleagues who usually exchanged a few words with Diane during breaks kept their distance. Rodrigo passed her twice without a greeting. Fernanda veered off her path to avoid passing the section where Diane was working. Diane didn't need much to understand what was happening. Vera had called. What Diane didn't know was exactly what had been said, and to whom, beyond Claudia. But she recognized this type of maneuver. She had seen it before. The person in power calls, plants a seed of doubt, suggests a non-existent problem, and lets the environment do the rest. No one needs proof. Suspicion is enough. Late that afternoon, Claudia called Diane into her office. The room was small, with a glass table and 2 chairs. It smelled of stale coffee. Claudia remained standing, which spoke volumes. "Diane, I need to be frank with you." "Perhaps," Diane said, taking a seat. "I received some feedback about your service yesterday." Claudia chose her words carefully, like someone treading on cracking ice. "Feedback from an important client who found your tone inappropriate." "Inappropriate in what way?" "That you were challenging, that you created a bad atmosphere." Diane was silent for a few seconds. "I understand," she said. "And do you agree with that assessment?" Claudia didn't answer immediately, and that pause was the most honest response she gave throughout the entire conversation. "What I can tell you is that this client has a very close relationship with people who matter to this boutique, and such situations need to be avoided." "Situations like responding in French?" Claudia frowned. "It's not that." "Then, what is it?" The manager closed the folder in her hand, even though she hadn't opened it. "I'll need you to sign a formal incident report. It's protocol." Diane looked at her for a moment, then signed without protest. She carefully placed the pen on the table, stood up, and left. The next day, 2 of the clients she had attended to the previous week returned to the boutique and specifically asked for her. Claudia noted this in silence, saying nothing, but the process had already begun. Diane knew that night. Instead of going straight home, she sat at her kitchen table with the small, black-covered notebook open before her. She spent 2 hours organizing everything she had observed in the past weeks. The cash flow that didn't align with client volume, supplier contracts with below-market terms, the poorly positioned display window, premium products stagnant due to incorrect exposure. It wasn't a rant, it was a document. She wrote with the precision of someone who had done this before: numbers, estimates, comparisons with industry benchmarks. Every observation had a basis, every suggestion a logic. When she finished, she read everything once, made 2 adjustments, and closed the notebook. Then, she stared at it for a long time. Delivering it was a gamble. It could be ignored. It could be used against her. It might not reach the right hands. And if it reached the right hands at the wrong time, it could accelerate exactly what she was trying to avoid. But not delivering it was also a choice. And that choice came at a cost she wasn't willing to pay. The next morning, Diane arrived at the boutique with the document in a plain envelope, no name on the front. She asked the receptionist to deliver it personally to Mr. Eduardo Tan, not his assistant, not his secretary, but him. The receptionist looked at the envelope, then at Diane. "He doesn't come here often." "I know," Diane said, "but when he does, please deliver it." She returned to her station, tidied her section, attended to 3 clients, smiled when she needed to, and waited. 2 days later, when she arrived at work, there was a letter on Claudia's desk. Diane didn't read it, but she saw the logo in the corner. It was from Tan Holdings. Claudia called her into the office at 10 a.m. with an expression Diane hadn't yet seen on her. It wasn't anger, it was discomfort. "Your situation here," the manager said, choosing each word carefully, "may be changing soon." Diane asked in which direction, but her heart pulsed with a different understanding. Diane left the office without knowing what that phrase truly meant. Your situation here may be changing soon. It could be dismissal. It could be something else. Claudia had given nothing more. No tone, no direction, no timeline. And that ambiguity, Diane knew, was sometimes worse than a bad answer, because the mind fills the silence with the worst possible scenario. She returned to the sales floor, tidied the scarf section that was already tidy, refolded what was already folded. She needed something to do with her hands while her thoughts organized themselves. That afternoon, Vera appeared again. It wasn't shopping hours, and she brought no companion. She entered, walked slowly through the boutique, greeted Claudia with 2 prolonged air kisses, the kind of greeting that is a display of power, not affection. Then her eyes swept the salon until they found Diane. When they did, she smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already won. Diane didn't avert her gaze, didn't smile back, continued what she was doing with the same calm as always, but inside, something tightened. Vera stayed for about 20 minutes, bought nothing, conversed with Claudia in a low voice near the counter. Before leaving, she passed the section where Diane was and said, without stopping, almost as if talking to herself, "Some people confuse competence with impertinence. It's a shame." She left without waiting for a reply. Rodrigo, across the shelf, heard everything. He said nothing, but took a step back, as if to make it clear he wanted no part of it. Diane took a deep breath, put away the folded item in her hand, and went to the restroom. She stood for 2 minutes in front of the mirror. She didn't cry. It wasn't that. It was just the kind of pause the body demands when pressure accumulates. She returned to the sales floor. The next morning, she arrived at work to find her drawer rummaged through. Nothing was missing, at least nothing she could prove. But the organization was different. Someone had tampered with it. The small, black-covered notebook wasn't there. She had never left it in the drawer, but she realized that whoever had searched expected to find it. At 11 a.m., Claudia called her again. This time there was another person in the room, an HR woman Diane had never seen, with a thin folder on the table and a pen in her hand. "Diane, we'll need to formalize a few things." The HR woman opened the folder, but before the termination contract, there was another document, an internal incident report. It stated that an item of significant value had disappeared from inventory that week, and that, according to staff reports, Diane had been seen near the restricted area outside of usual hours. Diane read slowly, line by line. "This didn't happen," she said calmly. "It's an investigation process," the HR woman replied, in the neutral tone of someone who didn't care about the truth, only following protocol. "While it's ongoing, we'll need you to sign an acknowledgement form and remain restricted to common areas of the boutique, without access to the premium section, until the investigation is concluded." Diane looked at Claudia. The manager did not meet her gaze. Diane read slowly, without haste, from beginning to end. It was a letter of termination, dated that week, citing inadequacy for the job profile and reports of conduct incompatible with company values. She read it a second time, then placed the paper on the table. "May I take a copy?" "Of course," said the HR woman, with the neutral tone of someone executing decisions they didn't make. Diane took the copy, folded it carefully, placed it in her bag, thanked them, which clearly disconcerted the two across the table, and stepped onto the sales floor. Fernanda looked at her with the expression of someone who knew and didn't know at the same time. Rodrigo studied the ceiling. 2 clients who had arrived shortly before were waiting for assistance. Diane walked up to them. She attended to both with attention, with care, with the same unhurried pace as always. One client bought 3 items. The other left with Diane's name noted in her phone, promising to return. Claudia observed all this from the office door, saying nothing. At the end of her shift, Diane organized her section one last time. She straightened pieces that were slightly askew, repositioned 2 products that had shifted small gestures no one had asked for, and no one would notice. Then she slowly removed her name tag, ran a finger along the edge of the metal, and carefully placed it on the counter. She went to get her backpack. It was at that moment that the receptionist approached her, a slightly different expression on her face. Not urgency, but something. "I have a call for you," she paused. "From Mr. Eduardo Tan." Diane froze for a second. "Please transfer it," she said, her voice steady. She walked to the fixed phone in the corner of the boutique, the same corner where 3 weeks prior she had made her first note in the notebook. She picked up the receiver. "Diane," the voice on the other end said, direct, without unnecessary introduction. "I received your document. I read it carefully. I have some questions." She waited. "Can you meet me early tomorrow?" "Not here at the boutique." "I can," she replied. 7:30 a.m. "I'll send you the address." The call ended abruptly, without pleasantries, without any promises. Diane slowly replaced the receiver. She stood for a moment, her hand still resting on it. From across the boutique, Claudia had seen the call. She hadn't heard, but she had seen Diane's posture during the conversation. Her spine erect, her chin slightly raised, a calm that wasn't indifference. And for the first time since this whole saga began, the manager wasn't quite sure what to think. The address Eduardo sent was for a small, discreet cafe, 3 blocks from the central business district. Not the kind of place someone of his stature would choose for a business meeting. No meeting room, no assistant, no reserved table with a card. Just a table at the back, 2 coffees, and him in a simple shirt, no tie, holding the same thin folder Diane had seen described in archived photos of the company. He rose when she entered, shook her hand firmly. "Thank you for coming." Diane sat. She didn't say she had no choice. It wasn't entirely true, and he probably knew it. Eduardo was 53, with gray hair at the temples and that specific gaze of someone who had built everything he had without inheriting a thing. He wasn't the kind of man who impressed at first glance. He was the kind you underestimated once, and only once. He opened the folder. Diane's document lay there, with annotations in the margins, made in pencil. He had read it carefully. That alone spoke volumes. "I'll be direct," he said. "This document describes problems my internal team identified over 2 years. I want to understand how you saw this in 3 weeks, selling scarves." It wasn't praise. It was a question. "Because I wasn't looking at the scarves," Diane replied. Eduardo remained silent, waiting for more. "I worked for 8 years in consulting for luxury brands in Europe," she said without haste, without trying to impress. "I learned to read operations by what isn't working. Client flow, product positioning, actual margin versus apparent margin. What's in the document is what any experienced analyst would see in 2 weeks of direct observation. Why were you observing?" "You were hired to sell." "I was. But observing didn't stop me from selling, and what I saw bothered me too much to ignore." Eduardo looked at her for a moment, then at the document. "There's a section here." He pointed to a page about supplier contracts. "You say the terms are below the European market by about 18%. How did you arrive at that number without access to the contracts?" "An estimate based on the list prices of suppliers I identified from internal tags. I could be off by 2 or 3 percentage points, but the direction is correct." He made a pencil annotation. "Why didn't you send this directly to me from the start? Why wait 3 weeks?" Diane considered the question carefully before answering. "Because data without context is noise. I needed enough time for the numbers to make sense on their own." "And why?" She paused for a second. "I wasn't sure if you were the type of person who listens or the type who dismisses." Eduardo lifted his eyes from the paper. "And now you know?" "I'm still not sure." He almost smiled. "Almost. You know my wife asked for your dismissal. It wasn't a question." "I do," Diane said. "And you still sent the document?" "Precisely because of that." Eduardo was silent for an extended moment, looking at the page about supplier contracts. Diane said nothing, but both knew that if someone cross-referenced those numbers with the names behind the suppliers, a familiar name would appear in at least 2 of them. Eduardo closed the folder, crossed his arms over the table, and looked at her with a different kind of attention. Not the attention of someone evaluating a resume, but of someone trying to truly understand what he was seeing. "What do you want?" he asked directly. "I want to work on a problem worth solving." She didn't hesitate. "This company's European expansion has structural flaws that will prove costly in the next 2 years, if not corrected now. I know that market. I have contacts that took decades to build. And as you can see, I know how to identify what's wrong before it becomes a loss. You're offering me your services. I'm stating what I can do. What you choose to do with that is your decision." Silence. Eduardo looked out the window for a few seconds, then back at her. "There's a corporate event in 10 days. Investors, partners, some international clients. My wife will be there. I also want you to be there." A calculated pause. "I'm not promising anything," he continued. "I'll review the document with my financial team this week. If the numbers hold up, we'll talk again before the event. If they don't, it was a good conversation, and I'll pay for the coffee." It was fair. It was also an elegant way of saying, "I haven't decided yet." Diane nodded. "Understood." She stood up, picked up her bag. Eduardo also stood. "One last thing," he said before she left. "How did you know I would read it?" She thought for an instant. "I didn't know. I gambled that you were curious enough to at least open it." She left the cafe into the morning light, with the same steady stride as always. But something had shifted. It wasn't relief yet. No. It was something closer to the sensation of having laid all her cards on the table and still not knowing what hand the other side held. The event was in a 4-story hotel ballroom, with chandeliers that cost more than cars, and a seamless service of waiters who moved without a sound. Diane arrived punctually, in a simple dark dress, unadorned. Not the kind of outfit that demanded attention, but the kind that didn't detract from it. She recognized some faces, investors she had crossed paths with years ago in very different contexts, European partners whose names appeared in reports she herself had analyzed. No one recognized her. She had counted on that. Eduardo greeted her briefly at the entrance with the same objectivity as in the cafe. He merely stated that the numbers had held up. Nothing more. He indicated a table near the center of the ballroom and moved on. It was enough. Vera arrived 20 minutes later. She entered with the self-assurance of someone who knew every inch of such a space. A long gown, discreet but expensive jewels, a smile calibrated for the occasion. She greeted investors by their first names. She embraced partners with the familiarity of someone who cultivates relationships with care and intention. When she saw Diane seated at that table, she paused for a fraction of a second. Then, she continued smiling, but the smile tightened by a millimeter. She approached Eduardo and whispered something into his ear. He listened, nodded slightly, and did not reply. Vera waited longer. He had already turned to greet someone else. Dinner was served. Conversations flowed. Diane observed, listened, participated when someone addressed her, and twice, European partners at the adjacent table initiated conversation in French. She responded naturally, with the technical vocabulary of someone who knew the sector from the inside. One of them jotted something down on his phone after the conversation. Vera was 3 tables away and saw everything. When dinner concluded and the ballroom transitioned to the speeches, she took the floor first. It was the usual script: acknowledgements, a vision for the future, references to the company's international positioning. She spoke with fluency, with elegance, with that French she used as a trophy in such moments. The audience applauded. It was the polite applause of those who were well-fed and satisfied. Then Eduardo stood. "Before we conclude," he said, with that calm voice that didn't need volume to fill a ballroom, "I'd like to share something with you all." Vera, still standing near the microphone, adjusted her smile. "In recent months, we have identified significant flaws in our European expansion strategy. Flaws that have cost us real opportunities and that need urgent correction." He paused. "You've received a summary on your tables. Please follow along." Another pause. What surprised me wasn't identifying the problems. It was discovering that they had already been mapped with precision and depth by someone who had been working in our boutique for less than a month. "Diane, could you please come up here?" The ballroom fell quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes something. She rose, walked to the center of the ballroom with the same steady pace, without haste, without hesitation, without the burden of needing to prove anything. Vera did not move, but the knuckles of her hands, resting on the nearest table, turned white for an instant. Diane stood beside Eduardo. He took a step to the side, not backward, but to the side, as if sharing the space, not yielding it. She opened the folder she had brought. "I will be brief," she said in clear, direct English. "There are 3 central problems in the European expansion that, if not corrected in the next 6 months, will result in market loss in 2 strategic regions." And she proceeded without long introductions, without circumlocution. Data, comparisons, projections, each point supported by numbers that anyone in the room with financial experience could verify. She spoke in English, then repeated the central points in French for the international partners, without announcing she would do so, simply doing it. One of the European investors leaned forward in his chair. Vera attempted an intervention once, raising her hand politely, and said, "With all due respect, these data were compiled by someone without formal access to the company's contracts. The margin of error could be significant." Diane turned to her with the same calm as when she had replied in French at the boutique. "The estimated margin is on page 3 of the document everyone has just received." She paused briefly. "But if there is interest in comparing it with the formal contracts, I would be happy to do so now." Silence. Vera did not fully retreat. She tried a second time, differently, more socially, as if appealing to the audience. "The issue isn't just technical. It's about representation. How can someone without an executive link to the company speak for it before international investors?" Diane let the question hang, then replied slowly. "It's precisely why the problems went unnoticed for 2 years. Those with executive links weren't looking at the numbers. They were looking at the stage." The European investor, who had jotted something on his phone during dinner, leaned slightly to the side and whispered something to his colleague. Both nodded. Vera slowly lowered her hand, staring at the table in front of her. Diane closed the folder. "That's it," she said simply. The applause that followed was not the polite applause of satisfaction after dinner. It was different. It was the kind of applause that happens when an entire room understands, at the same moment, that something profound has just changed. After the event, the ballroom slowly emptied. Diane stood near the window with a glass of water in her hand, while some guests bid their farewells. 2 of the European partners approached her, not out of protocol, but with that genuine curiosity of someone wanting to understand who they were speaking with. They talked for almost half an hour. One of them mentioned a conference in Lisbon in March. He said it would be interesting to have her there. She noted his contact. Vera left before the end, without saying goodbye to Diane, without creating a scene. She departed with the same elegant stride as always, her face composed, her smile in place. Only those who knew that smile intimately would know it was empty in a different way that night. In the days that followed, things changed in a quiet way, which is how important things usually change. Eduardo formalized a proposal for Diane the following week. It wasn't the position she had asked for because she hadn't asked for any. It was the position that made sense. Director of European Expansion, with real autonomy to map, negotiate, and correct what was wrong. A competitive salary, a 90-day deadline to present a structured plan. She read the contract carefully, asked 2 questions about operational autonomy, received the answers, and signed. Claudia found out via corporate email, like all the other employees in the boutique. She stared at the screen for a long time, then closed her computer and went to attend to a client. Rodrigo, who had pretended not to hear so many things over those weeks, sent a short message to Diane. Well deserved. Good luck. She replied with a simple thank you and put away her phone. Vera, for her part, continued to exist in the same way she always had, with the surname, with the lifestyle, with the events and the greetings and the calibrated smile. But something had permanently shifted. Investors who once sought her out to discuss her husband's business now approached Eduardo directly. European partners replied to her emails with cordiality and to Diane's with urgency. There was no public confrontation, no declaration, no named and shamed punishment. There was something more enduring. She ceased to be necessary. And for someone whose entire identity was built on being indispensable, this was the kind of loss that no jewel, no event, and no smile could hide forever. Diane started her new role on a Monday with the same worn backpack on her shoulder. The office was different, larger, with a view of the street, a proper desk, and a chair that didn't wobble. But she arrived at the same time as always. She made coffee, opened a new black-covered notebook because the previous one was full, and began to write. It wasn't victory she felt, it was something calmer than that. It was the kind of sensation that comes when a long, difficult journey finally reaches its rightful destination. Not relief, not euphoria, just the clarity of being in the right place, doing the right thing. In her first meeting with the European team, one of the analysts asked where she had come from, not with ill intent, but with genuine curiosity, because her profile didn't fit any of the boxes they expected. Diane thought for a second before replying. I came from a place where I learned that competence doesn't need permission to exist, it just needs patience. No one laughed. No one found it strange. 2 of the analysts jotted down the phrase. The meeting continued. Weeks later, during a call with a partner in Paris, the same one who had been mentioned as a potential threat to the company months before, Diane secured an agreement that none of the hired consultants had managed to close in 2 years. Not because she used tricks, not because she forced it, but because she knew the market, spoke the language, and understood what the other side needed to hear. Eduardo received the negotiation report on a Thursday afternoon. He read it, made a short pencil annotation in the margin, as was his custom. The note simply read, as expected. Diane never knew this. She didn't need to. What she knew, and what time had silently and irrevocably confirmed, was that class isn't about the language you speak. It's not about the surname you carry, the clothes you wear, or the ballroom where you are received with reverence. Class is about what you do when no one is looking, and about what you continue to be when everyone is. Diane closed the meeting, returned to her desk, opened the black-covered notebook, wrote Paris, meeting 0800. She closed the notebook. The small click of the metal clasp echoed in the silent room, and she left with the same worn backpack on her shoulder, with the same steady stride as always, as if the whole world still didn't know who she was, and as if, deep down, that had never truly mattered. In the end, it wasn't about French. It was about misjudgment. She thought she was superior, but she was inattentive. Those who speak loudest aren't always those who know most, and those who work quietly are almost always seeing further.